Member for Simcoe North.
Madam Chair, it's such a pleasure to be here yet again to speak about the lack of transparency in documents or lack of willingness of this government to turn over documents. It's a little bit like Groundhog Day. Bill Murray, what a wonderful movie that was. There's a good quote in that movie. Do you want to throw up here or do you want to throw up in the car? The person says, maybe both. Maybe that's what Canadians are feeling like here now, watching this debate on and on and on again, because the government refuses to release documents that we all know Parliament has an ability to get. I'd like to start off, though, with a couple quotes. The last time a Parliament was seized with a document production order from a previous government, Michael Ignatieff, as he was then the leader of the party, said, "The refusal to get to the truth is costing us our credibility as a nation." Mr. Ujjal Dosanjh believes, well, actually, I'll skip Mr. Dosanjh. That's too long of a quote. Mr. Brian Wilford, in fact, the supremacy of Parliament dominates. This is not something that's written on the back of an envelope. This Parliament, Madam Chair, has unfettered access to these documents. Mr. Sean Murphy, a Liberal from Charlottetown, the law is very clear, and I'm quoting, the law is very clear that Parliament has the unfettered right to seek the production of persons, papers, and records. Mr. Jack Harris, the NDP, the supremacy of Parliament is incontestable. The power of Parliament is predominant and overrides that. Madam Chair, we've been here before. We've discussed Parliament's ability to get documents. In that circumstance, there was a willingness on behalf of the government to find a solution that would enable Parliament to keep functioning while complying with the order of turning over documents. In that case, it was for a matter of national security, and that, Madam Chair, was what was borne out, or how the Special Committee on Defence was borne out, was in order to provide Parliament and parliamentarians with an ability to see documents that they had right and access to read, while getting back to the business of the House. This government has not offered any compromise on how they want to get back to the business of Parliament. And what is it that we want to get back to? We have to spend a moment just talking about this last-ditch check-writing scheme that the government announced last week. You know, it's all about control for this Prime Minister. Wants to control what you see online, wants to control other aspects of your life, and guess what? He's going to give you a tax break, but only if you spend it on the things that he allows you to spend it on. You want to buy a 6.9% beer? No problem. But heaven forbid it's a 7.1% beer. That's not covered. Time and time again, this Prime Minister has shown a penchant for wanting to control Canadians. But let's get back to the documents. As we talked about, Parliament has the unfettered ability to access documents, but this government seems to have a problem with conflicts of interest. It also seems to have a problem with producing documents. The WE charity scandal, the Winnipeg lab documents. Remember, at the beginning of COVID, this government tried to suspend Parliament and give itself unlimited taxing and spending powers without the oversight of Parliament. They've clearly shown a disdain for what happens in this place. Ministers routinely ignore invitations to committees. They routinely ignore orders to produce documents. They even threatened, or not even threatened, they even took the Speaker to court. On foreign interference, they didn't want to do anything, which is very interesting because the party that had absolute information asymmetry through this entire affair, the party that knows everything about foreign interference that there is to know, is the one who said all along, oh, we don't need to do anything. We don't need an inquiry. We'll just have Governor General David Johnson. We'll launder our reputation with his good reputation and everything will be okay. Turns out, oh my gosh, there is there. But they tried telling Canadians all along that there was nothing to see. And they didn't want to expose the truth. This fact that the RCMP has written a letter saying that their investigation, they may not be able to rely on documents that it receives, fair enough. The order does not require the government to send the documents to the RCMP. The order requires the government to send the documents to the law clerk. And the law clerk is supposed to send the documents to the RCMP. The RCMP is well within its right to not look at them. They're well within their rights to not rely on them for an investigation. As a member of Parliament, if I get those documents, Madam Chair, I'll just post them on the internet, and they can go and look at them if they like. But this government hasn't even offered a compromise on how they want to deal with it. But let's talk about the legal advice that the government is getting. The government's getting legal advice from the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice is advising, as I'm sure likely the case, the industry minister, the industry department, as well as the Privy Council office, and as well as the Prime Minister's office. Well, guess what? That same Department of Justice is also advising the RCMP. Kind of sounds like a conflict of interest there. It would be very convenient for the RCMP to write a letter that says, we don't want the documents, it could put the investigation at risk or privacy rights of Canadians at risk. That's really convenient, given it's the same lawyers advising the RCMP that are advising Industry Canada. So one has to wonder about the conflicts of interest that are going on in this case currently within the government apparatus at the Department of Justice, who have two clients with potentially divergent interests. One thinks we might be wanting to take a consideration of that conflict of interest, but Madam Chair, this is not the first time the conflicts of interest seem to escape members of Parliament on the other side. Need I remind the House about the Aga Khan, trips to Billionaire Islands, or Friends, which are no longer considered, or which was not found to be friends as it relates to receiving gifts, that the Auditor General singled out that $400 million of taxpayer money went to ineligible recipients, and specifically counted over 150, I think 183 cases of specific conflicts of interest where a board member was found to be benefiting a company in which that board member had a financial interest. That in and of itself should be cause for Parliament shutting down and having an election. The fact that $400 million of a fund was went to people who should not have gotten it tells you all you need to know about this government. Madam Chair, since we are going back in time, as my honourable colleagues like to do, I want to read a quote from the Honourable Scott Brison. In 1999, Mr. Brison says to the Toronto Star, "Nothing starts a feeding frenzy more than the smell of cash around Liberal backbenchers." In Hansard, 1998, The biggest obstacle that stands between Canadians and the attainment of their goals is the Liberal government. Wow. And this is what's happening. Canadians just want to live their life. They pay their taxes right, they want to do the right thing, and then they find out that the government, because they're completely inept and negligent, not only allows money to go to ineligible recipients, they appoint people to the board that's dispersing the money that they know are in an inherent conflict of interest. If it wasn't for the whistleblower, in this case, we would not know that at the beginning of these board appointments, the conflicts of interest that these board members potentially would be in was raised as an objection by ministerial staff, by department staff, saying these individuals that you want to appoint to the board would be in conflicts of interest and would make it hard for them to discharge their duties. That warning was very clear. And what happened? These individuals could not help themselves but be tempted to favor their own companies. We should be seized with this situation as we rightfully are in this House. Our parliamentary system works on parliamentary supremacy. The fact that we can ask for these documents as a parliament that have support of the majority of the members of this House, we should be able to see those documents. If the government, for some reason, is very concerned about what's in there for reasons of I'm not sure what, because it certainly isn't national security as it was in previous times, they could at least offer a compromise on how we could solve this situation. I have another proposal. I have another proposal for my friends. They could either give us the documents, or they could get the $400 million back. If they get the $400 million back, Madam Chair, then I would be willing to expeditiously move back to the work of the people. But frankly, Madam Chair, this is the work of the people. This is the work of the people. They expect us to come to Ottawa and find out what's happening with their money. But I've been driving around this town for the greater part of 3 years, and I still have not found the money tree that this government seems to think exists. I mean, Madam Chair, have you seen the money tree yet? I would love to find it. But they treat millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, and billions of dollars with such nonchalance. Very cavalier, if I might say. The honourable member from Abbotsford is a great member. I think it's time for accountability. And if they don't want to get the $400 million back, maybe they should have some ministerial accountability for this situation. What would that look like, Madam Chair? Yes, it is true that a former minister was the minister in place when these individuals were appointed to the board. But the current minister was made well aware of the improprieties and conflicts of interest while he was in the chair. And I quite, enjoy the Minister of Industry's enthusiasm and his flair that he brings to this place. But, Madam Chair, he was made aware of these improprieties and left the people on the board. Not only that, he recommended that one of the biggest offenders got a promotion. Ms. Andre-Lise Matteau was promoted from SDTC chair to the board of the Infrastructure Bank and left there just until the spring. When her appointment was made, there were rumblings that there were problems at SDTC, and yet this government still believed that it was appropriate to give that person a promotion. For the life of me, I can't understand why There is no ministerial accountability pretty much for anything that happens on that side of the House. Here's the way it works, Madam Chair. When there's a problem, someone will stand up in the House of Commons and say, that is unacceptable. And as Minister, I've asked to find out what happened and sit down, not thinking to themselves, wow, as a Minister, I am responsible for what happens in my department. And worse, when I do know that something has happened, I should take action. And if I don't take action, and it turns out, as the Auditor General has found, that $400 million went to the wrong people, well, gosh, gee whiz, as the Parliamentary Secretary likes to say, gee whiz, don't you think there should be some accountability for that? You would think, when we're talking about this kind of money, you know, has the government even identified any individual that's been reprimanded, that's lost their job? Have they even attempted to recover the funds? Have they actually got any of the funds repaid? Are they willing to compromise on this motion to present some other options in order for us to get back to the business of the day that they so desperately want to get back to? No. They haven't done any of that because they have such a disrespect for Parliament. There has been absolutely no contrition. There has not been a member of the government stand up and say, you know, not only did we make a mistake, but we didn't act fast enough, and we're going to do everything in our power to get the $400 million back. This is a government who's now thumbing its nose at the Auditor General for the second time. I need to remind the House that for basically the first time in a very, very long time, the CRA was given very poor marks for auditing CERB and wage subsidy benefits. And the CRA specifically said that they do not accept the Auditor General's findings. That almost has never happened in the history of Parliament. So now, a few years ago, they tell the Auditor General, we don't accept your findings, which was very rare, and they didn't pay any seemingly big price for that. So what do they do now? The Auditor General says, well, $400 is largely not gone missing. We know where it is. It just went to the wrong people. Well, that's okay. No big deal. We're not going to try to get it back. The Auditor General couldn't have been more clear about the conflicts of interest that exist. And these are actual conflicts of interest, not just perceived conflicts of interest, which, you know, the legal test is they're one and the same, but at least in this case, they were bona fide, actual conflicts of interest. So as I said before, Madam Chair, the government could get the money back. They could propose some alternatives in order for us to get past this impasse, but I view this as the job of the nation and the work of the nation to find out where this money is, to get it back, and to find some accountability. And this government likes to talk about, you know, the expense scandals from senators and Mike Duffy. Might I remind this House one more time? Let me remind the House one more time. The only scandal in Canadian history where the taxpayer got paid back. That was the big scandal. The big scandal was Mr. Duffy's expenses, which were incorrect and wrong, were actually paid back. That the check was paid back to the taxpayer. That was the scandal, Madam Chair. That was the scandal, Madam Chair. And Madam Chair, as in my last minute, I can feel the palpable desire for my colleagues on the other side, my very great friends, to ask me questions. I hope they might have checked the price of Bitcoin this morning. They might be a little upset about that. You know, they can't really stand up here and use their same old tropes. But Madam Chair, I might not have an opportunity. I want to wish you a Merry Christmas. I want to wish everyone in Simcoe North a very Merry Christmas, to each and all of our families. Joyeux Noël. Madam Chair, let's bring it home.
I thank the honourable member for the kind wishes, which I return. The honourable deputy House Leader for the government.
If the member would like to avoid answering my question and talk about Bitcoin and what he perceives the conservative policy to be around that, I would encourage him to do that. But my question, Madam Speaker, is this. He asked on 2 occasions, he said, there's never even been a compromise. Nobody even offers a compromise. You, Madam Chair, the Speaker, Madam Chair, literally is telling us what the compromise is. The Speaker, through your ruling, has said, send this to Proc so that Proc can study it and figure out the best way to do this. Like it's as though he doesn't even know what's going on in here. Like, the compromise is in the direction from the Speaker. Send this to Proc and let Proc deal with it, and they can properly figure out the best way to do this. But yet, he has no concept of that. I don't think he knows that, because he just comes in here and goes on and on and on and on about how there's no compromise. But literally, the compromise is on the table. So please, tell us about Bitcoin.
Honourable member for Simcoe North.
Madam Chair, firstly, the compromise is, as he promotes it to be a compromise, isn't much of a compromise, but it's not even coming from the government. But how about they give the documents? Why don't they give all the documents to Proc? That might be a compromise, but they're not even offering that. The way we got through this impasse previously, Madam Chair, in a previous parliament under a previous administration, was the development of a special committee. There was a desire by the government of the day to avoid an election and to avoid a complete shutdown of Parliament. They, Madam Chair, have not shown themselves to provide any amount of compromise on this issue. We should be getting the documents unredacted. The fact that the chair is trying to broker a deal, that's okay, but that is not a compromise in my books, Madam Chair.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Barrie-Innisfil.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I recall, I used to watch the Muppet Show, and there was these 2 characters called Waldorf and Stadler who used to sit there and just launch insults at people. And it's funny how it seemingly plays itself out over here too. Nothing. I'm not looking at you. Not looking at you or Garrettson, but oh, sorry, the honourable member from Kingston and the Islands. Madam Speaker, we got it slipped. We have $400 million. $400 million that, in 183 circumstances, has been funneled to board members of SDTC without any seemingly following the Conflict of Interest Act. We know that the Auditor General ruled on this. Should this not go to the police rather than a committee if criminal wrongdoing is at play here?
Honourable member for Simcoe North.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I have to remind my colleague, I'm not the same vintage as him, so that reference to the Muppet Show I do get it, but I thought it was just right on point, Madam Chair. Listen, the fact that we have $400 million missing, the RCMP should be investigating. They have confirmed that they are looking at documents. If we have an ability to ensure that they have all of the information that they need in order to do their job properly, we should allow them to do so. I'd like to thank the member for his great question.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm wondering if the member could provide his thoughts on actually someone that is an expert in dealing with the issue at hand. And that is Stephen Chaplin, who is a former senior legal counsel of in the office of the House of Law Clerk and the Parliamentary Council. And this is what he says, and I quote from a Hill Times story. "It is time for the House of Commons to admit it was wrong and to move on. There has now been 3 weeks, now would be much more than that, of debate on a questionable matter of privilege based on," and I really want the member to listen to this part, "based on the misuse of House power to order producing documents." There's no doubt, Madam Speaker, we have unfettered power. It doesn't mean that in all situations one should be using it. I believe we should be listening to what the Auditor General of Canada is saying We should be listening to what the RCMP institution is saying to parliamentarians, and we should not be listening to the self-serving leader of the Conservative Party who is dictating to Conservative members as to what it is they have to say inside the House in order to be in the good books and get the gold star from the Conservative caucus. When will a member recognize that what they are actually doing is in borderline contempt of Parliament, I would argue?
Honourable Member for Simcoe North.
Madam Chair, we cannot be in contempt of Parliament when the majority of the Parliament wants access to these documents. And it couldn't be more. It's really nice that the member, quotes the Hill Times. That's really nice of him to do so. But how about thinking about the largest circulated publication, the Globe and Mail, that says Parliament has an ability to get these documents, they have a right to get these documents, and that they should not stop until we get those documents. It is the business of this House to find out where $400 million has gone, and the fact that this pretend minister. Parliamentary secretary says we shouldn't be using this power. For what purpose then would he want to use this power, if not to find out what happened to $400 million?
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable député de Rivière-des-Mille.
The honourable member for Rivière-des-Mille. Well, I will once again remind my dear Conservative colleague that the police does not want or need these documents. And this House has been stalled for over a month because the Conservatives want the documents to be revealed. But on a different topic, we have heard that there could be a 24-hour gag order to enable the government to pass the measures announced last Thursday. What does my colleague think?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last. What? On what? Oh, Madam Chair, I'm unaware of the 24-hour gag order. I apologize. But I would say to my honourable colleague, with respect to the RCMP not wanting the documents, it's up to them to not receive the documents. If the government would like to provide the unredacted documents to members of Parliament first, and then maybe we can decide what we do with those documents, that would be a compromise, but that hasn't come out from this side of the House either. The fact that the RCMP might not want to look at them or thinks that it could be a violation of privacy, that's for them. They don't have to choose to look at the documents if they don't like to. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Barrie Springwater or Medonte.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my good colleague and bordering neighbour to the north from Simcoe North. I'd just like to quote something very interesting that came out of this whole testimony, and the SDTC whistleblower stated this, and I'd like his comments on it, please, if I could. And I quote, "I think that the current government is more interested in protecting themselves and protecting the situation being a public nightmare, and they would rather protect wrongdoers and financial mismanagement than have to deal with a situation like this SDTC and the public sphere." That's quite a resounding quote. I'd like to know his comments on this quote from the whistleblower.
Honourable member for Simcoe North.
Madam Chair, what a great question and a pointed a quote from my great colleague and friend and neighbour. Yes, the government seems more interested in protecting themselves or their friends that might have had some criminal wrongdoing. But let's remind ourselves, they went out of their way to freeze the bank accounts of the people that they didn't agree with. Why don't we freeze the bank accounts of the people who are on the board of SDTC until we get the $400 million back?
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Waterloo.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I've been listening to the debate intently today, and it's been quite interesting to finally see Conservatives taking some responsibility. Today, the member for Barrie-Innisfil referred to what's happening in the House as a standoff. As per the definition, a standoff is a stalemate or deadlock between two equally matched opponents in a dispute or a conflict. What's really interesting about this place is, and this member, I do find him to be an honourable member. I was a little bit disappointed when he would make cheap shots at the member for Winnipeg North in regards to cabinet position or not. I think he's above that, but clearly the Conservative contamination is taking place, and even the good ones are having to fight for that gold star. So I would just like to ask the member, does he feel that the member's comments from Barrie-Innisfil are actually accurate, that they are equally matched in the responsibility as to the lack of progress taking place in this chamber to fight for the very good people we are fighting for. So I'll just say one more time, because I think it's important. I fight for the good people riding in Waterloo. They are the reason why I am here. They would like us to get to work just like they're going to work. They know the Speaker's ruling. They're saying, hey, call the question. Liberals agree we should get to the bottom of this. I think every party agrees we should get to the bottom of it. And I'll just put, right before the House went for...
To give the honourable member for Simcoe North 4 seconds.
It's also just interesting to note is that my attire was questioned.
The honourable member for Simcoe North, a very short answer.
Madam Chair, I think everyone in this place can handle a good-natured whipping, and I think my friend on the Parliamentary Secretary side is a great person. I would just say we are at a stalemate. We should find a compromise to move on, but you know what it starts with? Getting the documents first and foremost. Thank you, Madam Chair.